Good evening from New York. I'm Michelle Norris in for Lawrence O'Donnell. If you want to know what being president is all about for Donald Trump, the last 24 hours have been very instructive, starting with a revealing new report from Rolling Stone. Sources with direct knowledge of the matter tell Rolling Stone that one of the lessons Trump took away from his previous stint in the White House is that he was wrong to leave a ton of money on the table as president. According to two people who have been in the room with him in moments of casual banter, Trump has mentioned that it was stupid of other Republicans and advisors to persuade him, at least on occasion, to side with government ethicists who cautioned him from obliterating the line between public good and private gain. That reporting coming on the same night that Donald Trump held what critics labeled a, quote, orgy of corruption. An exclusive dinner gala with the president at his golf club outside Washington for more than 220 mostly anonymous and mostly foreign winners of a contest in which the objective was to pour the most cash into Trump's meme coin cryptocurrency. Those winners had to navigate a gauntlet of protesters outside Trump's club in a light rain. The White House did not release any details on who the invitees were, and at least one who wanted to remain anonymous wore a mask into the event along with their tuxedo. Attendees included former NBA star Lamar Odom, who posted about the event on social media while promoting his own meme coin, and Justin Sun, a Chinese-born crypto billionaire whose company was under investigation by the Justice Department and the Treasury. He also faced a lawsuit by the SEC, but that suit was paused in February after Donald Trump took office. Sun reportedly spent more than $40 million on Trump coins, making him the top donor at last night's gala. He posted video from inside the ballroom where a crowd of admirers cheered on Trump. And while the White House insisted that Trump was attending as a guest on his personal time, he spoke at a podium with the presidential seal.
What a nice place. Did you get to see the helicopters?
Yeah, super cool.
Good seeing you. Covered up pretty good. I don't see a lot of window here. How do you like this location? Pretty good.
Nice. It's great.
Last night's winners paid an average of $1.8 million each to be there, according to the blockchain analytics firm Hansen, pumping an estimated $394 million into Trump's cryptocurrency. And some emerged from that dinner gala feeling like they didn't get their money's worth.
Some guests left disappointed after Trump gave only brief remarks at his Virginia Golf Club, repeating talking points about a U.S. Bitcoin reserve, then left without taking questions or photos.
That wasn't the only report of unhappy invitees. Crypto podcaster Eleanor Terrett posted to social media that two attendees told her while the food was good, they were disappointed by the lack of meaningful interaction with the president. He just gave a few remarks and left, one said. But for those who paid the most, the party was still going on today. The top 25 holders of Trump coin, who paid an estimated $111 million, according to crypto intel firm Inca Digital, lined up outside the White House today for a private audience with Trump. And the top 4 Trump coin holders got a special Trump watch, allegedly valued at $100,000, including Justin Sun, that top donor who had faced multiple federal investigations and lawsuits until Trump took office this year. But no one may be happier about last night than Donald Trump himself. Two Trump-affiliated companies own 80% of his meme coin project. Those companies get a fee for every trade, and those fees have totaled to more than $324 million since January, according to the research firm Chain Analysis. It's not known exactly how much goes to Trump personally, but it is likely more than any other president has ever made while serving office. We are in new territory here. Ashwin Subsingh is a senior political reporter at Rolling Stone. He was one of the reporters on that story about Trump's desire to cash in on the presidency, and he joins me now. Thanks so much for being with us on a Friday night.
Thank you for having me.
I want to begin by reading another piece of the story from you and your colleague, Tim Dickinson. You write, Trump does not hold space in his mind for any distinction between his private interest and the public interest. A deal is a deal. The president has said in the past, and he said that several months ago, according to two of your sources. That's interesting. A deal is a deal, no distinction between being president for 330 million Americans and being in business for himself. As I said, this is new territory. We've never seen anything like this before.
You were saying at the top of this segment that critics have described that crypto Trump summit as an orgy of corruption. I mean, there isn't really a more apt term than that to use to describe not just that one event, but what has been going on for the past few months after Donald Trump retook the White House. It's not just the crypto stuff, it's stuff having to do with his family business empire. It's the Qatari government's Sky Palace that was gifted to him. He likes to say the government, but it'll be there for his potential private use via his Presidential Library Foundation once he's no longer leader of the free world. And we could go on and on. And you have said multiple times that this is uncharted territory. I don't think that that is something that can be drilled into the American consciousness enough. If anything, it is being undersold right now in our politics and in our media about the level of corruption that Donald Trump and his business associates and his business empire and his family are perpetuating right now as they cash in over and over and over again on his holding of the office of the presidency. And the thing about it that is even worse than the first Trump term, and Trump's first term in office was by no means squeaky clean in these matters. It was also staggeringly corrupt. He has somehow eclipsed even the sky-high standards of that. And it's just so out in the open and so brazen. I'm running out of polite words to use to describe it on the air.
Now, so of course, Democrats have been raising alarms about this, but you also talk to a lot of Republicans in the White House and on Capitol Hill. Are any of them expressing misgivings about this kind of behavior, even in private, if they don't want to be quoted on the record?
Every once in a while, they might do the occasional PR manicuring. They might sigh a little bit on the phone or in person, describing, oh, I wish maybe the president of the United States wouldn't do this. But would it shock you or your viewers at all to hear that the Republican Party elite right now, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Trumpism at the moment, is just letting him get away with this, or in some cases, they're just gleefully backing him? I mean, the standard on this is something very similar to what we reported on when we were asking Republicans in the administration and who have advised Trump for years on what is your legal standard for a second Trump presidency, particularly with regards to executive power, immigration, things like that. And there was one lawyer who I was talking to who simply stated the prevailing legal principle is, and I quote, what are you going to do about it? You can apply the what are you going to do about mentality to how he and his family and his lieutenants have been conducting themselves when it comes to not just defending, but perpetuating his gargantuan levels of corruption right now.
This is not Trump's only crypto venture. You write that this seems that all of them seem to be heavily supported by foreign capital, and the people who would normally investigate that, the Attorney General, the Secretary of State, seem to be looking the other way. So where is any kind of, any kind of authority that would look over his shoulder, tap his shoulder, say, you've got to stop doing this? I mean, I guess that's what the lawyer was saying. Who's going to stop him from doing this?
At least for the time being, particularly in a midterms environment, there just isn't any. He is essentially going unchecked on these matters because, at the risk of repeating myself, the prevailing legal principle in this administration of what are you going to do about it? And also, not only is Attorney General Pambani and people like that aggressively and intensely looking the other way, but President Trump directs them on what to do. He's evaporated the supposed judicial and legal independence of them.
Aspen Subsing, thank you very much for this reporting. Good to be with you tonight. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Senator Michael Bennet, Democrat of Colorado, serves on the Finance Committee, and he joins me now. Senator, this week, before the crypto gala, we were talking about the luxury 747 Trump officially accepted from Qatar. How are you processing all of this, and what are the legislative checks that you might be able to use to try to bring him into line with the norms that we normally see with the president and any elected officials trying to avoid at least the appearance of this kind of corruption?
Well, I mean, he obviously, we know now for 2 presidencies that the more brazen it is, the more he likes it, because I think that he's using this to basically say, I think I'm immune from anybody's oversight. And he's not. And I wrote a bill last week called the Stable Genius Act that would say that no president, no member of a president's family, and no member of Congress should be able to issue cryptocurrency. And if they own cryptocurrency, they should put it in a blind trust so they don't influence the value of that while they're in office. That seems like a pretty obvious thing that we should do. And I think we should have a vote on the floor of the Senate when we get back from this recess, and that'll give Democrats and Republicans the opportunity to say whether they will endorse this kind of corruption, or, given the opportunity to vote against it, that they'll take a vote against it. You know, it's one thing to say in private that you're disgusted with this behavior. It's important for this to come out in front of the American people so they can make a judgment about whether or not their elected officials are willing to do the oversight that is required, and especially at a moment like this.
But in the Stable Genius Act, the bill that you've introduced to regulate this, Democrats are not in total agreement on this. Are you surprised by that? And what are they concerned about?
I actually think that's a really important point. So my amendment, which people can learn more about at michaelbennet.com, is called the Stable Genius Act. But you're right, there is an underlying bill that is called the Genius Act, and that is meant to regulate stable coins in the United States. And you're right, there has been some disagreement in the Democratic Party about that. I don't believe we should pass that bill as long as Donald Trump is manipulating cryptocurrency around the world, as long as he is trying to jack up his family's valuations by billions of dollars, and yet that is at risk of actually passing the United States Senate in a week. So not only do I think we should ban Donald Trump from issuing his coins, I don't think that piece of legislation is anywhere near ready to have bipartisan support in the Senate.
Now, pardon me for asking this, but sometimes when new technologies appear, whether it's AI, or even in issues like infertility treatments and new technologies that present all kinds of advantages, there are times when the technology gets out ahead of the broader understanding in the places where laws are made. And is this one example of that, where the lawmakers are struggling not just to figure out how to legislate this, but to just understand the basic tenets of cryptocurrency?
I think that is really important, Michelle. It's true. That's totally understandable. It's new technology. It takes people time to understand it in the Congress, and we should delay this so they do. But let me mention something else. I'm doing 3 more town halls over the next few days, and I guarantee you that those town halls are not going to be, we've got hundreds of people signed up for it. They are not coming to talk about the Stable Act that the Senate is coming to pass. They're coming to talk about the fact that they're losing their health care. They're coming to talk about the fact that their kids are losing their access to meals. They're coming to talk about how we need to fight this reconciliation package. And not only that, that we actually have to build a healthcare system and a modern education system in the United States of America. None of that has anything to do with the insanity that Donald Trump is pursuing at the moment. But we can't lose track of that, especially, I would say, as Democrats who lost the last election to Donald Trump. We've got to have a positive vision about healthcare, about education, about housing, about how we create an economy again. When it grows for everybody, not just the people at the very top. In other words, we can't just survive the Trump presidency. We've got to come out on the other side in a way that the country's going to thrive. And in the meantime, we got to make sure that we hold him accountable for the nonsense that he is putting the American people through.
And as you note, a reconciliation bill is coming your way in the Senate that has provided tax breaks for the rich and serious cuts for those who are living on the other end of the economy. Senator Michael Bennet, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up, as Donald Trump once again escalates his attacks on Harvard, what does it mean for the future of one of the world's most renowned universities? Stay with us. That's next. Welcome back. The thousands of international students attending Harvard University can stay enrolled, at least for now, after yet another federal judge ruled against the Trump administration today. The U.S. District Judge in Massachusetts temporarily blocking the administration from its move to ban Harvard from enrolling any foreign students. Yesterday, Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem described the latest escalation against Harvard as a warning to all universities.
I sent them a letter that said they will no longer be allowed to participate in this student exchange visitor program, and that's up to 27% of their enrolled students. This should be a warning to every other university to get your act together.
Hillary Burns, a higher education reporter for the Boston Globe, has been covering the story, and she joins me now. Hillary, can you lay out what happened yesterday, why this is a critical issue for Harvard, and what mechanism were they trying to use to prevent Harvard from enrolling foreign students who come from foreign lands?
Yes. So yesterday we learned that the Department of Homeland Security was revoking Harvard's ability to enroll foreign students, which was shocking to the entire campus community. It sent shockwaves through Cambridge and beyond. This is the latest escalation, as you pointed out, in the Trump administration's campaign to reshape the nation's oldest university to align with its worldview.
Normally, countries would hold up a university like Harvard as, a point of pride. And in this case, the Trump administration gave Harvard no notice before announcing this ban yesterday, and yet told them that this was supposed to take effect immediately. What did that mean, for the students who are on campus, for the programs that enroll large numbers of foreign students? How exactly would this have happened if Harvard had decided to comply? And they're not. We should just say they're using the language of war. They refuse to surrender. But how ideally was this supposed to take place?
Yes, so the Harvard administration was going back and forth with the Department of Homeland Security for weeks over an extraordinary records request. They were asking for personal information about international students. They also wanted video footage of all protests at Harvard dating back for the last several years. And that was something Harvard says they did respond to that records request, and they handed over records. We don't know the extent to which to what was included in that, but we know it was inadequate for the Department of Homeland Security, and they moved forward and revoked international enrollment at Harvard, which again is just an extraordinary and shocking escalation in this battle between the Trump administration and Harvard that's been going on now since the Harvard administration sued the Trump administration in April, and they sued them again this morning. And that's when a federal judge here in Boston did issue a temporary restraining order so international students can stay. Yesterday, students were scrambling and didn't know if they'd even be able to graduate next week. Harvard's commencement is occurring next week. So there was a lot of confusion, but Harvard got to action quickly, filing this lawsuit, and that restraining order did come through.
So can you explain just a little bit more about the judge's order today? And this is a very busy time on any college campus. They're preparing for graduation. Students are getting ready to move out. International students, that's just generally complicated because of the distance they have to travel and the paperwork that they generally have to go through. So when the judge issued this ruling, is it a temporary stay? Tell us a little bit more about the ruling, and then what is the next step?
So for now, international students who are already enrolled in Harvard can stay enrolled. They can stay in the country. Students who are planning to come for the fall semester will be able to do so. But we don't know what kind of chilling effect this will have. Already, we've seen student visas being revoked across the country. Some of those have been reinstated. But still, scholars are really concerned about the chilling effect that international students that are so important not only for the revenue of these universities, but also the academic vitality, their contributions to scientific research. They might say, I'm going to go elsewhere. I'm going to go to another country that has friendlier policies for me and that I won't be nervous about, getting a traffic ticket and getting detained, or having my university, their ability to host international students, have that be revoked. So people are really worried that we're going to start to see international students choose other countries to enroll, which did happen during the first Trump administration as well.
And I've got to let you go, but I'm not saying that other universities are trying to exploit this issue, but are they waiting with open arms? Are they starting to line up saying, we'll take you if you can't stay in America?
Yes, we're seeing that from French and Canadian institutions, and perhaps in other parts of the country that are more aligned with the Trump administration as well.
Really strong reporting on this, Hillary Burns. Thanks so much. That's Hillary Burns of the Boston Globe. Still to come, in the midst of graduation season, what is another Trump presidency really teaching America's future leaders? That's coming up. It is graduation season, and the current crop of young people walking across that stage this spring have grown up with Donald Trump as the commander-in-chief or the campaigner denying his election loss for most of their lives. And so there is no doubt that he will leave a mark on a generation of young adults who have watched a man voted twice into office smash norms, stoke divisions, seek retribution, and ignore the Constitution and the rule of law.
I've been freaking out a lot about this speech, honestly. And as I search my heart today in addressing you all, my moral and political commitments guide me to say that the only thing that is appropriate to say in this time and to a group this large is a recognition of the atrocities currently happening in Palestine.
This world is yours now, and this world needs fixing. And I pray to the heavens that you are the fixers.
I call upon the class of 2025 to withhold donations and continue advocating for disclosure and divestment.
You've used disappointment to sharpen your convictions. You now know with more certainty what you believe and what you refuse to accept.
We saw how policies that claim to optimize actually traumatize. And we saw how those in charge abandoned their obligation to defend free expression and to protect the people they pledged to serve.
Young people are always watching adults for guidance about guardrails and decorum. And what did they see under Donald Trump? Adults cheered a man who made fun of people with disabilities. Adults looked the other way when he talked about grabbing women by their private parts. Adults continue to accept and exalt a man who was twice impeached and convicted of 34 felonies. Adults continue to support his agenda around immigration, even though it smashed constitutional notions of due process. Adults, even those who expressed reservations, supported his agenda to provide tax cuts to the rich and enact massive cuts in programs for the poor and the elderly. Not all adults, of course, but enough of them went to the voting booth to say all of this is condoned and acceptable. Even when the threats and the vows of retribution became more heated and more common, they returned him to office. And then those same adults remained silent while the administration lectured the nation about the need for merit-based ideologies while appointing a litany of leaders who are manifestly underqualified for cabinet positions. At the same time, this administration dismantled DEI programs because diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives allegedly discriminate against white Americans, a claim made with no proof, all bombast, no facts. The kids who have grown up under Trump's shadow have inherited a world that is undeniably diverse. This young generation is the most diverse cohort America has ever produced, but they are walking into a world where the very word diversity has been demonized and weaponized to systematically cauterize the civil rights and human rights gains that should have been their true inheritance. Instead, what will they inherit from more than a decade of Trump's ascendancy and takeover of the Republican Party? Graduates marching across stages this spring are strutting into an uncertain job market and a tumultuous economy. They and their children and their aging baby boomer and Gen X parents are less likely to have solid health care or benefit from research-based medical advancement. Let's remember that 55% of higher education research is, or perhaps we should say was, funded by the federal government. This administration's slash and burn and flail around a chainsaw approach to federal programs was ostensibly to cut waste, fraud, and abuse. The real goal, however, was really about providing more tax cuts for ultra-wealthy Americans. It has done little to gild the futures of everyday American kids. And even with all of this, Donald Trump made significant inroads with Gen Z voters in the last election. There's been a lot of analysis on the Gen Z voters who gravitated toward Donald Trump in the November election, but less so on the impact that his leadership has had on their psyches or their outlook in life. Now, we wish the best for all graduates this year from universities, from trade schools, military academies, community colleges, and high schools. The hills may be steeper for some of you, but sometimes it's easier to find your stride when you're charging uphill. We hope you find your best selves. And we hope that the adults who are now running things find a way to give the so-called Trump generation the opportunities in life that you all deserve.
And let me also say that we firmly believe that our international students have the same rights to freedom of speech as everyone else, and they should not be targeted by the government for exercising that right.
Students at Columbia University let their school's acting president know exactly how they felt during graduation proceedings earlier this week. They expressed dissatisfaction with the school's capitulation to the Trump administration, as well as the continued detention of student and lawful resident Mahmoud Khalil. Contrast that with the scene at Morehouse College in Atlanta this week. The school decided to empower its student body by giving graduates the opportunity to introduce themselves and share their own accomplishment as they take the next step into their futures. Tressie McMillan Cottom is a professor at UNC Chapel Hill and an opinion columnist for the New York Times. She joins me now. I'm such a big fan of your work. I'm so glad you are with me for this conversation. In your experience as a professor, how have the Trump years shaped the way young people see the world?
Pleasure to be here with you, by the way. Michelle, you look wonderful in the chair, by the way. Listen, it was heartbreaking to me to hear you a little earlier call this the Trump generation. By the way, you know, I was of that moment where we were talking about the Obama generation and how we would have this generation of children who had never known an America without a Black president and all the possibility that portended for our multiracial future. And to hear about or to consider what a Trump generation will learn from us, and as an analog to what we had hoped they'd learned about us from the Obama years, is a bit heartbreaking. When I talk to young people in particular, with keeping in mind that college students come in a wide range and varieties, but in young people in particular, there is this sense that we prepared them for an America that does not exist. Right. So when we talk about how they are much more accepting of sexual minorities, for example, that didn't fall out of the sky. They came through K through 12, where they learned these lessons about how you treat other people and to be accepting, and how we were supposed to treat people that were different from us. only to arrive in college and find out that not only was that not the reality, but the very things they had been taught to value now makes them targets in their own country, either because they are those people, they embody those identities and those lived experiences, or because they sympathize or empathize with those people. So there's a sense of loss of trust, not just between generations, but I think between young people and what they think is possible for them in the United States of America. And frankly, that is heartbreaking.
You know, every news cycle, we're talking about the shattering of norms of one kind or another. And the word normal is always, you know, it should be a laundry setting. I mean, it's not, you know, it's a word that you have to be careful when you use because norms are always changing, but they're usually not getting shattered in this way. And so what may seem abnormal to people who remember a different standard and a different set of decorum, particularly from the Oval Office or from the White House, is perhaps fairly normal to the young people who've grown up with, I mean, Donald Trump has been, you know, president, running for office, president again. This has been the person that has held the highest office in the land or has been seeking that office for a very long time. What does that mean in terms of the norms or the ideas that they might have around what is acceptable and what is not acceptable in terms of the way that they treat their fellow human beings, in terms of the way they see the world and themselves?
We cannot overstate the importance that sort of like internet culture did to already sort of destabilizing the norms of what was acceptable discourse, who was an acceptable victim of targeted harassment, that kind of thing. And that had just been allowed to sort of simmer beneath the surface of our cultural awareness in this country. But in so many ways, Donald Trump embodies what for some of us was Gamergate, or if you've spent any time in sort of online communities, the sort of culture of using humor to get away with transgressing those norms that you talk about. Donald Trump takes that and he sort of levels this up to the legitimacy of the highest office in this country. And I think for a lot of young people, what they see in that is that, one, if you can get away with it, then it is normal, which I would point out is an absolute horrible way for social cohesion to work, right? For us to cohere as a multiracial democracy, it takes a certain amount of risking failure in reaching out to one another. And Donald Trump embodying that there are no bounds to your bad behavior if you have enough power, enough wealth, enough status, enough prestige to get away with it. That is a lesson that runs counter, by the way, to our idea of meritocracy, runs counter to our idea of ourselves as a compassionate nation. But it is hard to argue against the fact that he is winning with that type of behavior. And, you know, we talk if for anyone who's ever raised children, you've heard they don't hear what you say, they hear what you do.
They watch what you do, right.
That's right. We can communicate these messages all day, but if we reward the behavior that allows you to ascend to the top of the political, economic, and cultural hierarchy of the United States of America, then that is what we are endorsing. When those norms are gone, this is something that troubles me. It is not easy to rebuild them. And that is something I'm not sure that young people understand, but then I'm not sure that the rest of us quite understand and appreciate that either.
I am an optimist, and I want to believe that the young people who are graduating this season are marching into a world of opportunity. What will it take to make that true?
Oh, well, one, is going to take them. It's going to take them in partnership with whatever is left of our democratizing institutions, higher education, public service, our justice system, et cetera. It's going to take bringing them fully into the fold, by the way, politically, economically, and culturally. And I think that is true. It's always been true. We need to do that for young people. But I think it is particularly true right now because they do not have something they are trying to get back to in the way that many of us are trying to return to a past. I think that their imagination for what's possible then is less constrained by what has already been. And I think we're going to need the power of their political imagination to build the sort of economic safety net that they deserve, that we promised them, and that we are now not able to deliver to them, and something that Donald Trump promises them that he can fix. We need a much better answer together to helping them build that. And we're going to need them because we need their political imagination.
And one of the skills they're going to need is learning how to lead people who don't always agree with each other. That is not just wishful thinking when it happens. It usually is a skill, and we need to recognize that and elevate that. Tressie McMillan Cottom, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Still ahead, she is an award-winning human rights activist. So why is she currently in ICE custody? That's coming up. Stay with us. You may remember this story from Donald Trump's first term. An immigrant mother in Colorado took sanctuary in a Denver church to avoid possible deportation. Jeanette Vizguera lived in that church's basement for months, becoming a national symbol of humanitarian resistance against Trump's immigration crackdown. Last week, Jeanette Vizguera was named a recipient of the prestigious Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award for working, quote, to tirelessly build coalitions at the intersection of different communities and causes. She learned about that recognition while she was behind bars at this ICE detention facility in Aurora, Colorado. Since she left her sanctuary at the church in 2017, Vizguera has remained in the country as her immigration case proceeded. She has been in the U.S. now for nearly 30 years. But in March, ICE agents arrested her while she was working at her job at a Target store. One agent telling her during the arrest, "We finally got you," according to Vizguera and her lawyer. She has been held in the ICE detention facility since then. Her lawyer saying that she is being detained in retaliation for her immigration activism. Joining me now is the journalist who interviewed Jeanette Vizguera inside the ICE facility where she's now detained. Maria Hinojosa is a Pulitzer Prize winner and the executive producer of Latino USA. She is also an MSNBC contributor, and she joins me now here in the studio. Why is Jeanette Vizguera so important, and what does this case say about where we're at right now in America with our immigration policy?
Look, not every immigrant rights activist gets named in 2017 as she was to the Time magazine 100 most important people in the world. She was. Jeanette Vizguera is known across the country and in immigrant rights organizations and sanctuary organizations as a huge activist. And she is not quiet. So we're the only ones who were able to get inside this detention facility. And I told you, Michelle, that I've been in maximum security men's prisons. You walk through 2 prison doors to get inside a maximum security men's prison. In this detention facility in Aurora, I had to walk through 9 prison-like doors in a facility where people overwhelmingly are not criminals except for their immigration status. She's important because she says she's being targeted not because of her immigration status, but because of what she says and what she does. She is calling herself, Michelle, a political prisoner. That's the first time that I've heard that in my more than 30 years reporting on this issue.
Now, you asked Ms. Vizguera whether she thought the Trump administration was targeting her for specific reasons. Should we take a listen to what she said?
Let's do that.
Y yo me pregunto, ¿por qué yo, que tengo un cargo menor, por algo que realmente no debía de haberme afectado nunca en mi vida, porque fue algo de tráfico? Estoy aquí, he luchado 16 años por parar mi deportación, porque una persona con 35 felonías está dirigiendo la Casa Blanca y no tiene consecuencias.
I mean, she basically said, that's why she feels that she's being targeted by this administration, because she will say something like that while she's in detention. She'll say, I'm here, but the president has been convicted of felonies. Why am I here? And why is he doing this to me? It's a really important case because of the fact that she is internationally known. I mean, being named the winner of the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award doesn't come to just anyone. And so she is continuing to organize even within the detention facility. She is organizing.
And so there's some real aspects to this because she's getting the RFK award when RFK's son is part of the administration that she is, willing to stand up to and willing to talk back to. Does the winning of this award change the fundamentals of her case? Because it does place a spotlight on her. It will keep her in the spotlight to some degree. It's not why you were able to get in to see her. I mean, that was more of a First Amendment issue. But does it change the fundamentals of the case?
Michelle, it puts her right in the crosshairs of presidential politics in the United States of America. And Jeanette will just say to you, look, I'm a mom, I'm an activist, I'm fighting for justice. But right now, being given the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award, when Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is part of the Trump administration, I mean, she's given that award because of her work, but there's no way that you can't walk away from the fact that she is now in the crosshairs of this administration and its policies, specifically regarding women, immigrants who are activists with a big voice.
So when asked to go deeper and talk a little bit about her feelings, since you were able to interview her, let's just listen a little bit more of this tape before I come back to you.
So what do you think the Trump administration, qué es el mensaje que ellos están tratando de mandar nacional y mundialmente, teniéndote a ti detenida?
Están tratando de decir que ellos tienen el poder, que ellos tienen los recursos y que van a sacar a cualquier persona, no solo a mí, a cualquier persona que sea incómoda. Quieren mandar el mensaje a los otros activistas igual que yo, que van a sufrir las mismas consecuencias.
Help us understand what's the road ahead for her.
I mean, it's complicated. It's complicated because all immigrant cases right now are very complicated. But I think
there's a significant backlog.
And there's a
as well.
huge backlog. But Jeanette Vizguerra is known around the country and around the world. And people are watching. And what she is saying that the conditions inside detention facilities have only gotten worse because she's been detained before. And she is saying there are human rights abuses that are happening inside these detention facilities. And then she's saying, look at me. There's no reason why me as a mother should be here. And I'm telling you, Michelle, she will not be quiet. This is somebody who takes her activism very seriously.
And I got to let you go, but that is perhaps one of the more interesting aspects of this, is that she is in the spotlight now, but that may be giving the current administration an excuse to try to make an example of her.
It's going to be a difficult case, but she's not going anywhere. And she even said, if I end up in Mexico and something happens to me, if I'm deported, I will hold this administration responsible.
Maria, thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in on a Friday night. That is tonight's last word. Thank you for allowing me to sit in for Lawrence O'Donnell. I hope everyone has a great weekend. Stay safe.